Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
I'm excited to have you here. You have a vast background, and it's rare to sometimes find people with this kind of a background just because you have so many different sections to it and so many things that you've studied and done that I was just like, I am so eager to have him on and just
Mhm.
pick your brain and get to learn, but
Right.
also share that with
Yeah.
the listeners to level up in life and consciousness and all that good stuff. So thanks for taking
Great.
the time and sharing space with
Thank
us.
you. Thank you.
So my listeners always know, they know that I always love to ask this question first. And that is like, how did you get into this? What was your journey to, because it's such a vast background and like I said, I don't find that as often. So how did that begin or how did that develop and how did you get to doing what you're doing now?
So, one of the things you said, and I'm going to come back to it after I describe a little bit of my journey, is that it looks like I've studied a lot of different things and done these vast differences. They are not. For me, the journey, which we'll talk about, actually was where I was putting pieces together to fill out the whole. It's like, if you're trying to describe like a building, you need to be able to, or something, an object, you need to be able to go all around to being like, okay, now I see the whole thing, right? And for me, that journey was like that. It was like I got a piece, and then I felt, there's more. And finally, at this point, at 53, I feel very good. I feel very good that for me, and I can't speak about anybody else. I cannot speak about anybody else's traditions, their practices. This is just for Alex, right? And because it's for Alex, and then when people come to me, they're coming for Alex. They're not coming for Alex as the individual. They're coming for my years of experience and ability to see clearly, and then very quickly in my work with them, they also can see. So my journey is that they see. And what is it that I want them to see? I want them to see and experience. When I say see, we mean experience that they are whole, that they are complete. This is the important thing. That's the goal. That's the goal. So now that was to answer you on this end, and so that returns us back to the story of. I would say the easiest story, which I've told my entire life, is the one where I was a teenager and I really experienced impermanence very strongly. It Don't ask me why, it just the way it was. I felt completely like no matter what I do, no matter what experience I have, it's slipping through my hands. And I had a deep sense that there was not a foot that I could put down to feel like, yes, there is permanence. And that was very, very frustrating, this quality of impermanence, that everything was just moving and the ground underneath me was moving just as well. And that led me to my one of my first books was Suzuki Roshi's book on Zen. And that began the journey of really discovering the traditions of the East. And I've spent my life since the age of 16, 17, the whole time, really a deep understanding of the Eastern traditions and a very deep understanding on the Western traditions. And I went to school, of course, for that as well. And I feel a beautiful integration actually between the two. And so that began my journey. And then you could just imagine, I went to education, then I took a course, then I took a seminar, then I became involved in the Buddhist tradition with my teachers. I mean, so I've had teachers and guides and education all combined together from both traditions, and it's been an amazing journey.
I love that. I love how your goal is people to see themselves as whole. You mind explaining a little bit about what that is, wholeness and seeing from that perspective?
Sure. So wholeness is a word we use for an experience. So for example, when you're eating ice cream, let's say, in the moment that you eat that ice cream, just in that one split second, you notice that you have the taste of the ice cream, but in that experience is also that you feel content, like you want nothing else in that moment. It's simply right in the eating of the ice cream, you experience it like, ah, yes. For about a second, it's a moment of completeness. Nothing is wanted. See, so craving, desire is a constant chasing after experience, people, places, things, experience. Why? Why do we do all that? Because we want to experience fullness, wholeness, completion. That's what we want. And that experience is something that we're chasing in our entire life. And what we see is that when we don't experience that quality of wholeness and we don't know how to sustain that, what do? We seek more, we desire more, we crave more. What does that lead to? Addictions. All addictions are the expression of feeling not at home within oneself. What's another way of saying wholeness? Feeling at home within oneself, and not just in one's mind, in one's embodiment, in the body. I am whole in the body.
I love that. I think, I love when you bring up the body part because there's so many times where we as individuals are so stuck up here, right, in the mind and do it, and all of that, that we don't really get into the body. We actually repel against the body. So if we have a discomfort, if we have something there, we want to turn that off and turn that experience off immediately rather than open that door and say, let me learn from this. What is this trying to teach me? What is this trying to help me in that process?
I agree with you 100%.
And I love how you bring up the addiction part. It's so true, right? We get caught in that cycle. And I think addiction is going rampant in this day and age just because, with life and lockdowns, things that have gone on, it's amped up because we're looking for that nice dopamine response just to ease things rather than focus on, again, that uneasiness. Why is it that we run away from the uneasiness so much?
I think in the West, maybe just human beings, so this way I can make it much broader. From an early age, we don't have the environment that creates for us this invitation for being uncomfortable, right? So resilience and grit, which are very big topics that have been around now for the last 10, 15 years by Angela Duckworth, really started to look at who is the most successful in life. Those people usually have the ability to be resilient. What is resilience? The capacity to be uncomfortable. So the more capacity we have to be uncomfortable, the more capacity we have to be able to go for our goals. Because along the journey, we all know nobody gets out of this life unscathed. Okay? We're all going to have our bruises and bumps and scars and surgeries and tattoos and, all of that. We're all going to have them. We're all going to have them. Metaphorically speaking, we're all going to have them. So therefore, along the journey, it's like you're going to get bruised. Well, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do with the discomfort? And as you said, if we use the discomfort as the doorway in, then what happens is we find the richness and then more capacity to be uncomfortable, by the way, because there are certain circumstances in our life that could be chronic, that could be ongoing, not just some kind of, temporary, I lost my job. That's uncomfortable. What happens if you have a chronic illness? What happens if you're in a relationship that, someone's not well and, longer, or you're with parents, or who knows, whatever the longer term might be. So our capacity, and one of my favorite books is Tara Brach's book on radical acceptance, which is incredible, by the way. If anybody wants to know on how to meet the uncomfortable, that is an amazing book to begin with. And then you need a meditation practice, because it's within the meditation practice that we can learn to be with experience without becoming overwhelmed by experience. And in this case, uncomfortable. By the way, when we say uncomfortable, we just don't mean physical. We're talking about uncomfortable emotions, uncomfortable thoughts, uncomfortable sensations. So we're just simply talking about uncomfortable. But let me add one more piece before we move on. The uncomfortable quality of those experiences, also, we contribute to them. And let me say what I mean by that. Let's say I get fired from a job. And then all of a sudden, I walk away from that job and I'm like, I deserve it. I'm a piece of shit. Well, what happened now, what we're doing is we're bringing our baggage to the experience that's happening. And by bringing the already insecure, negative, doubtful, not whole perspective, we're now massaging that situation, influencing that situation. And what happens is this, we feel that it's even worse than it really is. So we amp it up. And in Buddhism, we say it's bringing suffering to suffering. Now, this is such an important piece. What if we learned to bring a different attitude to the uncomfortable? Then it would be placed in its appropriate place. Then we would have the capacity and the resource internally to feel strong and capable of actually dealing with the difficulty. So therefore, it's like, okay, I got fired. Cool. All right, hold on. Sad, pissed off for a moment. Back on the horse. Let me get going. Now that's how you cope with it.
And so, like, when you explain it that way, I love it. Is there like, because there's the experience of being human, right? And so, like, I talk about this a lot, where I'm like, some people say, well, you say you meditate, you do breath work, you do this, you're very level headed. So that means you don't get emotional at all. I was like, no, I do. I go ask my wife. I have my moments. I'm human, just like anybody else. But I love how you said in that aspect where when shit hits the fan, right, you have that reaction, but then you get right back to centeredness once you've gone through it, whatever that time period needs to be. And then all of a sudden you're like, all right, now let me get refocused, let me get recentered, and let's get to work. Let me shift my perspective. I like that. I think sometimes I wrote a book called The Walk in the Dark, and it's all about the beauty of suffering, right? And how we're never going to be able to get away from that. And I don't think, as you said, like, I love the metaphorical statements you're sharing there. How many times that, we all have trauma. So, and there's so many traumas that we've all gone through. And I think for my 37 times around the sun, I really believe it's those are the things that we're chosen for. We chose those things to give us the experience we want in this lifetime. But what happens, when we are, create, everything's in relationship. So how is it that you talked a little bit about baggage? I want to dive a little deeper into that. About carrying, our traumas and how we carry them into relationships, and how we bring those forward, and how do we stop that pattern? Because, like, I know even from my own experiences, I was unconscious, even though I was very trying to be conscious. I was still unconscious. I call them the blind spots. They were still there, and I had to see patterns show up in my life to go, wait a minute, I've seen this too many times. This is something I need to pay attention to. And then it started to unravel so much. Like, I always call it like Pandora's box of good. It's just like, wow, I didn't know this was coming. Oh my God, here's the dots, here's the connections. And then all of a sudden, here comes a beautiful transformation from it. Although for all the listeners, not a fun experience when you go through it. How does that all work? And how do we break that cycle?
You have to begin with the understanding of trauma. So let me begin at the beginning. It's very important that we lay the groundwork that there has to be an understanding of what happens, and then how do we resolve and heal that, okay? So as I'm teaching people about trauma, and I've been specializing in trauma for a while now, that trauma begins the moment we're conceived. And let me explain what I mean by that. The moment we're conceived, our interface in the world is our nervous system and brain. Okay, the nervous system in the brain is the most magical, amazing, high-level computer interface between our essence and life in the world. So if you think about it, it moderates the discussion between these two spaces. So what happens is we get influenced, as I said, none of us can get away without being influenced. So life is about conditioning. We get conditioned. There's no escaping. Being human, you get conditioned, okay? So the first conditioning that we experience is in utero, is our mother's environment and the environment that she's in. And all of that has to do with all of her emotions, all of her thoughts, all of her experiences are being translated and picked up by the nervous system. So the nervous system is interpreting this information and saying, is it safe and I can go play? And play means be myself. Or do I need to adjust and be careful and work on survival? Okay. Then we come into the world. And we are now embedded in our family environment, our culture, ethnicity, religion, our gender, all of the conditioning factors. And all of those are being met by the nervous system. The nervous system is saying, is this environment, are these two people, one person, whoever they are, is it safe for me to be myself? Well, most of us realize that, it takes a very conscious family environment, parents, to give us the opportunity to be as close as we can be to our sense of wholeness, right? I mean, even the best late parents struggle with that. Anyway, what happens? Trauma now starts to happen. Trauma has small t and big T, we call it. Small t is the everyday kind of, incidents that occur naturally in life. The parent is frustrated, the child is late to school, the parent screams at the child that one time, and the child locks up around that. The child gets hurt by that. And maybe that might not be the parent's usual, let's say, but once in a while it happens. But for that child's makeup, for them, that's an insult and an injury. And what happens with the nervous system? It contracts and it gets a little bit more tightly wound up. And what happens then? Once it gets wound up, the consequence is a set of emotions, belief systems, and thinking patterns that get laid in motion. So therefore, trauma creates the cascade of belief systems that arise out of there. And what holds this whole belief system together is that there must be something wrong with me. The core of all trauma is that we believe it has something to do with us. And so we carry this deep within us as a feeling or an existential ontological experience of a sense of lack. Like I'm lacking something. And of course, when we think we're lacking something, we think it's lacking our love from our parents, a new car or a relationship or money, all the things. But what we're lacking is that feeling of coming home and being whole. That's what we want. And we do need the right environment. And what's interesting as being human is that we do need love and support, like the beautiful light of love and support, to be able to play around with our own light and experience that, because we don't know what to do with that. That's something we get to practice. So the term trauma, and since I am in Greece, I've learned that the word trauma is translated as trauma. Trauma means rupture. When I heard this word, I was like, that makes absolute sense. Rupture. So therefore, trauma ruptures our natural environment and forces us to leave that to go address the external situation. So
now I was just gonna say, yeah, I love what you're sharing there, because one thing you see me smiling over here on this end a lot, because what you're being a chiropractor, you're explaining chiropractic in a nutshell of how the nervous system gets overwhelmed and how it cannot adapt because it's too overstimulating now. And then it doesn't allow, so then it creates these, we call subluxations, which is the brain now all of a sudden does not, can't communicate as well. It has to go into protection mode. And then that sets the tone, because if you keep having that stimulus, then the brain says, well, this is what we keep seeing. We have to move into that realm to adapt. And then that sets the tone, especially early on. Boom. Totally. I digress. Okay. So go ahead and continue.
No, but I want to say what in terms of the chiropractic. So what you get to see is the manifestation of the trauma in the form of the way the body holds itself, right? And if we want to know information about ourselves, all we have to do is tap into the way that the body is the barometer and the expressor of all the information. It is the Akashic records, if I want to say it, of all of our life. And we don't have to look far. We don't have to go back to our history. We simply are the manifestation of the lived trauma. So therefore, in the now, I am still in being like shot out of a cannon or an arrow being shot due to the momentum of the traumas. You understand? So therefore, if I want to know anything about me, well, I have to be like, what's my trajectory? Oh, that's so interesting in this trajectory. here I am. It's still being lived. So then when we come back to your question about what happens in our relationships, well, what happens is that we're just reenacting our traumas. We're reenacting our negative perceptions about ourselves with the other.
And really, all it is it really just then like a relationship with self because of that? And then is it like a reinforcement kind of a thing? Because sometimes the mind and the brain likes to, well, if I feel this way, then I have to see proof. And so you start to, like, sometimes people say you're seeking. I remember when I was trying to get away from drama, everyone was like, you attract drama in your life. And I'm like, one of my friends used to tell this to me all the time. And I was like, dude, I don't attract drama. I don't want drama. He's like, you seek drama, you don't see it. And so eventually over time, I started to see how I was seeking for it because I was creating no drama in my own life, just internally and so forth. And eventually when I saw that, I was like, oh man, it's not that. I'm seeking to reinforce something. And then as soon as I changed internally.
What was it? What were you seeking to reinforce?
Like chaos, basically. I have to have chaos in my life.
But to do what? Go deeper. What was the point of the chaos in terms of your experience?
I think it was just programming, like the conditioning of that to be like to continually to have that because it was in my life previously. Like that's what I grew up with.
But it has to have a purpose. So therefore, what did you get out of that experience? We don't seek experience unless it gives us something, even if it's painful.
True. I have to go back and think now. That's a good one.
All right. So leave that for a second, and that answers the question, which is we keep recycling. And you're asking why do we keep doing this in with our relationships and people and so forth. It goes back to something beautiful described by Harville Hendricks and his wife in the work of imagotherapy. Right. So imagotherapy simply describes relationships as the following: I have certain aspects that are cut off from me. I'm not integrated well, and I keep things in the shadow. What's in the shadow? Things I don't like about myself, some negative perceptions about myself. So what do? I keep those away from the light, and I would like for you and the relationship to help me heal that. Okay. Now, I'm not going to pick someone unconsciously who's actually good for me, because then what's going to happen is they're not going to want to play the drama out with me. They're going to actually force me to see what's inside of me, to come into a higher elevated state of relating. So what do? I find someone, as we, what's that saying about water? Water finds its own table. I keep forgetting how it goes, right? So human beings find their own energetic table, as I say, right? So another way of saying it is it's a vibrational level. And the agreement in the vibrational level is you don't touch my shit, I don't touch your shit, and we're just going to be together. But I'm hoping that by not touching each other's stuff, I actually heal myself. So look at the quandary that we're in.
I totally see that, because I look at my marriage in this aspect, and it's the total opposite, where it's like, we have an agreement where, sometimes we're going to hit we call pain bodies or whatever the terminology will be. And then it's like, hey, that's something you need to work on. I can support you in there. Do you want to go on your own with that process? Let's work through this together if you want. And most of the time we do. But it helps because sometimes I tell people your partner is actually your greatest aspect to help you become more whole if you allow it, right? Like you were saying, I love how you brought that up. Like, I'm going to keep the shadow away. Don't poke into it. You don't poke into mine, and We'll figure out how to heal anyhow. And that was me. That was my journey for a while. And then eventually I was like, hold up. I'm just going to have to learn to be a little more authentic. I'm going to have to get uncomfortable in ways that I usually don't, maybe not like. And the more I can do that, then maybe there's hope to the other side that I can heal and transmute the process to get past that and heal from that aspect. Mm-hmm. And what a journey it's been. But at the other end of it, it's been more freedom, and then it becomes easier. Now, if we get in an argument, or let's say I get poked in the way, and I'm like, let me think about why I'm reacting this way. I go through the process, and I understand. Okay, this is why I'm being this way. I apologize. I have to work on that, and then we help each other out through it. And it's been it's a fun process. But just adding to what you're saying,
and what you realize, by the way, let me just even go further in what you're saying, is that it's not like there are new issues that happen in the couplehood. It's the same issues recycled all over again. And the big aha is like, Right. The same space is being hit again. The same space is being hit. It's not like something different is being hit again. It's whatever is in the shadow keeps getting touched, you know? So everything in the shadow has to come out either in our own individual work or in our couples. It has to come out.
Now, does trauma, like, does it evolve? Because it's one of the things, like, you can talk about inner critic, or you can talk about the ego, or whatever that may be. And it's one of those things where, like, you talk about the same stuff recycling over and over and over. And it's funny because they will show up in different forms as you evolve. And I've interviewed people on this, and it's always fascinating in my own life when I sit back and watch that. And I'm like, oh, I got past this, I'm good. And then all of a sudden, like, maybe a couple of years later, I'm going, I thought I cleared that out. I'm like, why is that back? And then I'm like, but it's different. But it's then when you go through the work, you're like, it's the same thing, just a different, like, it evolved in itself also.
Correct. I mean, and there's a tendency for the unfinished material to morph itself, and it may not be as dense. It might be much more subtle and harder to catch. You see. And that belongs in the energetic body, closer to the subtle body, as we say in the East. It's not so obvious, maybe, let's say, on a holding pattern, the person's done good work, but there's a little bit still a stickiness, some kind of like maybe hope or fear, expectations, some aspect of not letting something go, and it's sticky. So, you can have it, let's say we have a spectrum of dense stickiness to mild, subtle aspects of it. The more we do the work, the more milder and more subtle it is. And the quicker we're able to recognize it, the quicker we're able to let it go and come back to our wholeness. That's the spectrum. On this side, we're unconscious. We don't feel whole. Simply, we're just reenacting.
So true. And even with my own life, it's kind of a lot of things I share, like even in chiropractic, like, or working out or good nutrition. Like I always say, the beginning, a lot of work, takes a lot of time. There's a lot of stuff we have to process through. But down the road, like you're saying, it gets so much easier. Not saying it's not fun. There's things that will still be uncomfortable, but it's so much easier to, like you said, recognize, boom, and we move forward and to grow and evolve. I love that. Traumas in the body. I know you do somatic work too. So when these traumas, how do they show up? And I know this is a very broad question, and I'm hoping we at least give the listeners something to tune in on this a little bit. How does it get, well, we talked a little about how getting trapped in the nervous system, but how can it like show up in different ways? If you just mind sharing some experiences or things along that nature for the listeners to understand. Because what I'm trying to share, like sometimes I try to share this even with patients, is like how if they're going through an emotion or there's a continual emotion, I'm always like, that's stored somewhere, or you're storing it in the body, or you're creating, or it could be an emotional trauma back in their early, childhood and stuff that gets trapped and stored. But love to pick your brain on this a little bit.
This goes back to the science. I mean, it's when we're accruing trauma, the nervous system combined then with the adrenal brain, cycle, we then produce hormones like cortisol and adrenaline at levels that teach us that we're still in fight or flight. So trauma creates a fight or flight system to be out of whack. And that could be, by the way, I hope people understand that trauma in this case doesn't mean the most horrible thing that you can imagine. It could be just a sense of not feeling like your environment and the people and circumstances just didn't support your own growth that enough. And what happens is that cycle gets started early on. Children start to have the stress response. You could see it by how they're reacting, how they're acting, how they pay attention in school. All those are symptoms in the body. See, you're asking that. The body from an early age starts telling the world that I'm at a heightened state of arousal. And imagine then being 20, 25, 30, 35, and then the body has been in a constant state of fight or flight. Well, we know that heart disease, cancer, strokes, and I can keep going on, that stress creates the environment for all of those to be at the higher rate. So
no, go ahead. Sorry.
The, the direct influence on our bodies is not being well. And that's the direct influence on our bodies. 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 And that's the direct influence on our
Like I said, I love hearing this. Someone from that who's not a chiropractor. It's awesome. I love this because it's so true. I mean, we call it being like the brain gets stuck in stress, and all that means is it's just the wiring pattern is
Yes.
in that high alert state. And because a lot of work I do is with kids mostly, and it's one of the things where when I see these kids being born 2, 3 years old and they're already hardwired that way, and then I'm like, man, what would 20, 30 years look like? What would
I'll
40
give
years
you
look
an,
like?
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, working with a client who comes out of Syria, and really experienced. He's a young man, so he experienced all the turmoil that growing up in there, and has moved in the last several years. And we were talking about work, and he was describing work like a war zone. And it wasn't until session 3 or 4 that I had my aha, because I'm paying attention. I go, oh my goodness, he's dealing with work in the exact same way that he did when he was growing up in Syria. And when that was revealed, he had the most amazing insight and a shift. And we had to do some trauma work, some EMDR, and some other methodologies to really soften the nervous system and the memories and the impact on the body. And he's doing much better. It took about 6 months of good work.
I love how you bring up it took 6 months, right? There's a lot of times people want that quick fix. They want it to be 1, 2, 3,
No.
and this is conditioning. This is programming. This is I call it programming, where it's built in, and now it takes a while to break that down.
If you're a couch potato for 20 years and you want to go work out, how long do you have to go work out to deal with the 20 years of being a couch potato, right? So it's just, we all have this mentality that I'd like to experience wholeness now without.
Totally, I get it all the time, so I'm with you. No, I love it, and it's one of the things too. Like all this stuff you're sharing is so true because like even I've read studies about, because a lot of my studies we're getting into the last couple of years about imprints in the womb of mom,
Yep.
and how that gets all imprinted in the nervous system. And they've done studies with Nazis, women who are pregnant, 7th, 8th, 9th, 6th, 7th, 8th trimester in the camps or whatever it may have been, and then look at the children and they see the stress levels of higher stress. And right now, a lot of the group that I'm a part of, we're looking at it going, okay, how many babies are going to be born during the lockdowns in COVID and are going to have that stress response of protection, of fear, to a higher alert state?
That's right.
We don't have enough data yet because obviously lockdowns, we've only been a year in, but I have a handful of newborns in my office, but it's tough to say right now. That's not enough data points, but we're predicting the same kind of thing where this is already starting to hardwire, and now they're into the world, and now they're looking to reinforce that process.
And if we have parents who are coping with it well, the benefit there is teaching their children how to overcome adversities. Right? So it's both ways.
Totally, it's so true, and I love how you bring that up because we always talk about the negative, but there's also that side too of the other coins.
Yeah. It's easy to whitewash all of existence that way, but we all know in the hero's journey, sometimes you got to go through some serious hell before you come out on the other side.
So true. And I think too, and the more you like, this is kind of what we've been talking about all the time. Like if you can get get used to being uncomfortable and so forth, it makes things easier, but then it makes that I always call freedom. I call it freedom because I just don't have a better term for it yet. Eventually one day I will. And wholesome, we can go that route. It is like wholesome, returning back home. I like that one too. Of breaking down to get to that point of being, to me, I just call free, where you're being yourself. You're back at home, right? And it's like going back home after traveling for a while, and you're just like, it's just something about being back home.
I think that's our life. I think that's Homer's journey in the Iliad, right? There's a couple of passages in there that speak about the whole journey that had taken place was about homesickness. So he had to go on all of these adventures to eventually return home. And we are the Odyssey. We are the Odyssey. So Homer wrote that book about all of humankind.
You're making me want to go back and read the Odyssey. No, I think that's, and I think sometimes, and like we said, with addiction and things like that, it's that lack of being at home. Like sometimes I'll work with people and I'll tell them, like, they'll get into a certain state, and I'm like, what is that showing up as, and what are you seeing the lack, right? Because we get so caught up in lack. Even for myself, I know I did that, and there's times they'll still sneak up on me too. Again, old stuff coming back where you're like, hold on, wait a minute, I know this story, I've heard it before. But getting to that state, is there a way that we can stay home, or is life designed to be out and in, out and in?
So, of course, we've been fortunate enough to have models throughout history of beings that have stabilized being at home and have lived life, right? So there are many, many great accounts of these great teachers, masters, or whatever you want to call them. And there's many books written about many of them, who did the work on coming home. And so we have the spectrum again. On this side, we have those beings that did that work and stabilized that. And then we have the spectrum of everybody coming in and out to varying degrees, right? So about 2 years ago, there was a book called The Science of Meditation. It was by Daniel Goleman. Not only by him, but I think Richard Davidson or David Richardson, I forget which way his name goes always. And the book basically said the following. It was incredible. It was the science. And it said that they saw the benefit of meditation for beginners, and that it created a particular kind of state. What was the state? A sense of calmness and an ease and a little bit more space from their traumas and conditioning, right? But then, after some time, they found that, they returned back to their conditioning. And then they did studies on the people who meditated 20,000 hours in their life, 25,000 hours. Then the group called the 30,000. This is just an incredible group of people, right? What they saw was that once they get past 20, every person they interviewed had a similar characteristic about them, that no matter what race, color, intelligence, gender, money, nothing, they had a very similar flavor to them. They were at ease, centered. It's incredible. So therefore, it takes, I'm going to be very honest, it takes a dedication to work through the density of conditioning to go from state to a trait life. Okay? So if anybody wants to do that work, that's what it requires.
Yeah, it's not made for everybody, right? Now, I do got a question on this, though. So a lot of times in my world, I consider myself a biohacker. I've been doing this for about 10 years. How do we, work with the physiology of the body to get faster results? And there's neurohacking that does something very similar, but in different ways to utilize the pathways or the laws of neurology to get certain results. There are some individuals that'll say, like, breath work, doing specific type or certain types of breath work can cut down from 20 years of meditation within a couple months, get you to that state. What's your opinion on that? Just curious. Love to pick your brain on that. As you brought up the whole 20,000 hour thing in the book, I remember reading that book. It's been a little bit now. But what's your thoughts on that perspective?
Listen, I've been fortunate enough to have good models around this. So for example, everybody wants to make a meditation a new Western form of let's get going here and 7-Eleven, quick, give me a supersized Slurpee here, right? And yes, breath work is fantastic, by the way. Breath work already gets the nervous system calmed down, then to do the work of letting go. But let me ask you something. If my daily life is the expenditure of my energy is being towards a neurotic states of existence, my half an hour of meditation or my half an hour of breath work is only a very small part of my day. Now, when I say meditation, I am not actually implying only the form that everybody is thinking, some kind of sitting down and you're just sitting. No, meditation is a way of living life. What does that mean? It's learning how to experience the quality of wholeness. We can do that through breath work and through meditative experiences. The person gets a glimpse of like, oh, that's it right there. And then what happens is once you have that experience, right? Some people call it the experience of awakening. I mean, there's a lot of fancy names for it. I just call it the moment of grace, as Adyashanti says. The moment we have that moment of grace, what we have to continue doing then is staying close to the fire of receiving more grace. And there are methods for that. There's ways to do this. They're very well outlined, by the way. And then we stick to them, and then it deepens and it deepens and it deepens. So
I like that. I think that's solid, and it's one of those things like they say with like in yoga, take your yoga off the mat, right? And it's a gradual process, because we all have knee-jerk reactions when it comes to the nervous system because of the conditioning and so forth, triggers and whatever the terminology you want to call it. But I even know my journey, because I've been meditating for 14 years. I've been pretty good now for it'll be 4 years in July, meditating every day. And it's one of the things where just seeing how my thought process go and just to, add to that, it's been absolutely amazing to see the shift. I get excited because I'm like, man, I've been doing this for, I've been really good for 4 years. I'm like, I wonder what the next 4 years is going to look like. Cause it's like where I'm at now in my life and how I don't get as reactive. I still do, but I know how to get calm, centered. And even when excuse my French, when shit hits the fan in life, I don't let it really get the best of me per se. And I'm able to be like, wow, man, 5 years ago, I would have been like upset, aggravated. If I lost money, I've been very furious. And now I'm like, it's fine. Not a bump in the road. Let's see how I need to adapt and make the best out of this. And taking that approach this is what I call that freedom, right? Because in my past, it was always following the same conditioning and leading to the same emotional imbalance and the chaos within. And now it's more like, no, this is fine. We will figure this out and we'll move forward. And it's like, no more of that emotional baggage. I feel a little not too bad. I'm actually looking forward to this.
There's a sentence that you can practice. It's just one of the first sentences, one of the beginning practices, is to simply start to say, I am not my body. I am not my emotions. I am not my thoughts. I am embodied. And that's if we do another one of these, I'll go through the 7 stages of how to go through it. But the first step is the realization, and this is what meditation practice allows you to do. Meditation practice allows you to step away from experience, thoughts, emotions, and sensations, and to start to become curious about the subject, the observing quality that is there, who doesn't have to be involved with experience. Now that's freedom. The first freedom, the first aha is, right, my thoughts, emotions, and sensations don't define me. Which begs the next question for the person on the journey is, then who am I? Right?
Love that. That's all. I think I'm gonna have to have you back on for the 7. I'll tell you that right now. we'll have to dive into that one of these days.
Yeah.
Real quick though, how can people connect with you and find you, see what you're up to, what you're doing, and all that good stuff?
The easiest is to go to my website, journeytowholeness.health. And if you Google my name, Alex Boianghu, and you'll see a listing on Psychology Today and another website called Hello Alma. I'm on Facebook. So, all the social media, I'm the only Alex Boianghu in the world, so it makes it very easy.
Nice.
So my name is quite unique. You're not going to find somebody else. So it's easy to locate me. And I also teach different courses. I just completed teaching 2 8-week-long meditation courses. And in September, I'm going to start another series of embodied meditation practice, and how to integrate our experience into everyday life. And it's an amazing. We meet 8 weeks in a row, once a week for an hour and a half, and we practice, discuss, and it's amazing.
Love that. For all the listeners, I'll have all that information in the show notes for you guys. Alex, this was a breath of fresh air. I really enjoyed your energy,
Thanks, man.
How you approach this, and all that you do in your life. And like I said, I'll definitely have you back on again soon and discuss a lot more, brother. Appreciate you.
Let's do it. Take care, man. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.